Hi, this is Peter and John. We're going to have a conversation around the project for Module 2, which is due on the 11th of October. And I'm going to take the opportunity to ask John about it because he's been through this process before and I'm new to it. And hopefully in my getting to understand what the assignment is all about, it'll help you to understand it too. So John, when I first read through this, I was wondering about, who do I have to go and see? Am I going to see my principal? Am I going to see a head of department? Is it someone outside the school? Who do I choose as my leader?
Yeah, Peter, that's a great question. And I think as folks look at the Blackboard shell and they see this sort of array of steps to take in developing their final product for this piece, what you really want to do is figure out, is there someone in this school, is it the principal, the deputy, or someone else who's actually changed something significant? Did we change pedagogical approach? Did we change a structure or the schedule? Did we change some kind of staffing mechanism, or did we integrate problem-based learning, or have we done something unique that's actually far enough along that you really have a curiosity to go to that person and sit with them in a, it's not an official interview, but a formal conversation / interview where you're asking and probing them about the steps they took in thinking through and then realizing this change.
So it doesn't have to be someone in a formal leadership position. It's just someone who's kind of led a particular change within your school context.
It ideally would be your principal, but she or he may be too new to the school. Yeah. And if it isn't anybody at your school, because your school hasn't gotten to that, or you're working in another agency, as some of our students are working in another sector, someone who's led change that you have access to without it being a big deal to find them. And then we are aligning this to a couple of things. The good weather instrument, which is really just food for thought. That food for thought meaning it's a structure that doesn't have the worry that it sounds too fancy to figure out. But was there any deliberacy? I think the most interesting part of good weather to me, Peter, that most leaders fail in is the compass, because it's very easy to have a vision, and maybe they haven't had that, but if you have the vision, it's how do you head in that direction? And the compass part is really tricky. And then building engagement in the two areas that people sort of feel they might be a little less successful in are getting that vision realized and then getting engagement. So you figure out from that instrument, what do you want to know from the leader about how they drove that change to success?
Well, and that's one I always struggle with, is this notion of I as a leader have a vision, but my team have to own it. And how do you get that balance between it being my vision, but it also being the team's vision?
That's a great first question, isn't it? That's a good question for the interview. And then there should be in Australia an alignment to the standards, a principal standard of ETSL. And that, at least, again, I'm not sure they're actually standards. I think they're organizers. But does it give you a lens to ask about so that you see we're using a theoretical framework, we're using a practical regulators framework, and basically you're trying to get inside the hood of the thinking of that leader into what was the plan going in, and then how were you able to get this to happen, and take those lessons learned and try to put some of the labels either of good weather from ETSL and or the ones that they share with you. Because if they've just made it up as they went along, that's pretty interesting change management process. Most will have actually been studying and thinking about how do you bring people along on the journey with you to get to the other end.
And it'd be interesting to see how aware they are of the kind of different leadership styles and whether they are flipping between different styles and they're kind of how overt they are in a sense about their leadership and to what extent it's a kind of natural part of what they do. So when I go into my interview, to what extent am I going in with a kind of list of questions? Here are things from the standards and from bringing the good weather that I formulate into a series of questions, and to what extent is it a more open conversation kind of chat around?
Yeah, I think good protocol for any kind of formal conversation is to have 2 or 3 or 4 guiding questions, but leaving plenty of time for filling in the gaps and expanding on that, not to worry that there's 50 questions, 3 or 4 really good ones. And I would go in with your passion and your curiosity. If you've been in a school where the change has happened and you've been party to it, you're going to have more inside information. But if you're new to it, or it was a change that happened where you weren't really affected and you're just curious, you might need a few more questions. But there are some people, when you ask them question 1, 25 minutes later, they've answered your other ones and they never had any stopping to their message. So they're just one long sentence. So don't worry about that all the questions get answered. It's much more, do you feel that you've learned the method to the madness of this change and ultimately the leader's vision in bringing that, because each of our students will be in a situation in a new setting, let's say as a deputy principal or principal very soon, if you're not already, where you're going to be asked to guide change in your school. And you're going to want to think about the methodology you're going to use for that change, the process you're going to use, and then what are you going to count as results? Because a lot of times the results that people think are going to be, we're going to increase student achievement, actually is very difficult to dissect. If you've improved school culture and you've got more parent buy-in, or you have teachers happier about what they're doing, those are really all perceptions. And are you willing to live with perceptions alongside of any of the state or federal mandates that are about student attendance or student marks or test scores, et cetera? Because most of what we're trying to change is alongside of those. They may or may not result in those, but we should have a better, more positive and more caring school as a result of what we've done. And so figuring out how did they understand what success was going to be at the end of this is going to be a really important component.
So when I'm going in, effectively, I've got my overarching questions, and then I'm kind of probing. Something comes up that's interesting, and I just probe that to try and unpack it, unless I've got the 25-minute speaker who I'm kind of like.
Yeah, and I think particularly from your good weather analysis, you'll see possibly where most of our students in the past have come back is they don't really feel good about how do you engage parents in the community. That's one, they feel like the school didn't do a good job. So ask that question so it rounds out. Use this as where you see gaps in your own experience base. If it's, how did you formulate a vision? Was it off the air? Did you go to a professional learning session back in the days where we could go to something? Did you watch our now dear beloved friend Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk and he inspired you? Where'd you get the vision from is part A, I think, because most of us don't know how that happens. It seems magical, like the design behind your Zoom. And then there's the engagement, but find the one or two that you feel like you're not as strong in to emphasize, because then you're getting value out of this course. You're not just practicing the things you already feel really good about. And for most people, that's making things happen at a classroom level where you all have that mastery. So it's really how to bring other people on board, how to get the parents and community involved, and maybe overall how to know that this thing has worked. And to remember what we're trying to do is build a better school that's more caring, loving, learning community. And then that piece of it is if it's adding up to where it's less than that, then it doesn't sound like a successful change.
That's really interesting. That whole issue about how you have metrics that are going to capture that you're going in the right direction. Right. Because very often you can't measure the end point. So you need little in-betweeny things that get you there. And I like that issue about, you know, is it making a better environment? I always had this argument back home where we have league tables of schools that we should have a complementary league table of the subjective well-being of the school community. And which would you choose, you know, the really successful academically with miserable kids and students and teachers, or the one that is kind of more balanced on each? Okay, so how long is these interviews supposed to last?
Well, you know, in a busy school day, if you get 20 minutes, you're pretty good. So if you could take a morning tea time and dedicate it to this without the phone going off or too many crises du jour, that would be great. So half an hour or less where you really focus, and you're also trying to get to know the leader in a way you don't. You might work side by side with them all the time in the executive, but you never actually sort of got inside their head, and try to focus this on an asset or a positive model. If you don't have that kind of role model, we're not looking for you to interrogate your principal of how some change was botched. There may be several of those examples. So if you don't have an ability to do that in your setting, let us help you find a setting where using virtual technologies, you can find some place that it actually has gone well. We're trying to study a change that worked. It can be a small change, but small can be significant if it helps kids be happier and better in their learning. So try to find something that worked out. The studying of things that have failed has its merits. In this case, this is designed to get inside some mastermind's head about how did you make that happen. And it actually turned out okay, because we really like to replicate that. I could give you a dozen examples of things that haven't worked out at all. And what we really learned is there were bad communication. It wasn't a good idea anyway. There wasn't good inclusion of the community. Or in the end, teachers never bought in to begin with, so it didn't work. So I don't know that we need to study that. We could have told you that before it started. Find something that worked and try to figure out if there's magic and capture some of that magic.
Cool. One final tip. What would your one kind of overarching tip be for people doing this assignment?
So we're in a combination, and Peter, you know this really well, and our students know it from watching and listening to us either on this, in this course or outside of the course, is we're in this transition between old and new school, whatever those terms mean, but between, we're asking kids to be passive and we have them regurgitate on tests we don't like anyway, to this new school where we're trying to personalize the experience and really drive this intellectual curiosity of every learner forward, not diminish it by year 5, where we've stolen most of their creativity from them. In that, enjoy this journey to study yourself as a leader and try to get to new school. Some schools are extraordinarily terrific at what they've been doing, and they're on a journey to do something different. Others have been further along in trying things different. And some of you are in really traditional schools par excellence by old terms. Wherever your school is fine, but it's how we're going to get further along toward new school, because that's where we're heading, a different kind of approach to teaching and learning. And let's study leaders who are helping guide us toward that sort of next phase of what learning has to look like, and therefore what teaching has to be.
That's great. Thanks, John. I found that really helpful. I hope you do too.
Yeah, thanks for all you're doing in the course. And Peter, pleasure to work with you. We look forward to chatting down the road. Everybody stay safe and have a good couple of weeks here.